allies welcome.
Yeah, by all accounts, it should have been very extensive. We know that in that initial process, he would have been vetted by the U.S. government, including the CIA. And then once he was granted temporary asylum, as he applied for permanent status, he would have gone through a variety of different layers of vetting. Those include identity and background checks, biometric vetting, in-person interviews, assessment of an individual risk, and eligibility under U.S. law. So that's several layers. And it's important to remember, too, the ultimate approval and of his asylum application was granted under the Trump administration in 2025.
Important in the context of the president and allies saying that this was the policy of the previous administration to let folks in without vetting. Important to keep that in mind. Zach Cohen, thank you so much. Let's get some perspective now with Donnell Harvin. He is the former head of Homeland Security and Intelligence for Washington, D.C., also a member of the faculty at Georgetown University's Emergency and Disaster Management Program. Donnell, thank you so much for being with us. Happy Thanksgiving. We're grateful that you could share some time. I wonder what a review, as the president has said, of every migrant admitted to the U.S. under the previous administration would look like, as we've also learned that officials are going to pause any migration case related to Afghans pending further review. What does all of that entail?
That entails going through and interviewing quite possibly anywhere from 70 to nearly 100,000 people, depending on what reports you read. It's got to be very clear to the audience that, you know, these Afghan asylum seekers who've come over have committed crimes at such a low rate. I was unable to find any major crimes that were committed by these individuals. These individuals and their family members serve the U.S. service members abroad, help save lives. In fact, there's many documented cases of former service people going over to rescue them even after the evacuation. What happens is that once these individuals go through that layered process of vetting and they get into the United States, they're kind of free to move around the country at their will. There's no further surveillance of them. There's no surveillance state of them. They're just like any other asylum seeker. They'll go through their process, and throughout their process, they will have interviews, and then they'll be part of a normal, non-enhanced vetting. What I believe that the administration's talking about now is some type of advanced vetting. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when you interview these people, when they go through the vetting process, you're looking behind, right? You're looking at their previous history, their ideology, who they've been associated with. That can't predict the future. And so this is the difficult part that the administration finds themselves in now.
Yeah, especially as we've seen so many cases of people being radicalized through a number of different means, if this in fact turns out to be terrorism. And that leads me to the next question. How is it that officials determine a motive accurately here? Because you have the administration saying that this was terrorism, but the investigators themselves have to piece that together to show evidence of it.
Yeah, in the absence of the surviving individual who's now under arrest cooperating, all reports saying he's not cooperating, they can still piece together their background. Who
brings you to what's the motivation? What's the ideology? You know, was he frustrated over his last 4 years here in the United States? Did he have PTSD because he was involved in some of the most forward-leaning, special operations type missions in Afghanistan, while U.S. intelligence community forces? Did he have a mental break, or is he self-radicalized? You know, did he all of a sudden gravitate to an ideology like ISIS-K or Al-Qaeda? There's a variety of things, push-pull factors that could get him to where he's at. None of them are excusable, but the FBI is going to really try to understand that, and also trying to make sure that he was acting alone and not directed. Are there any overseas communications that suggest that this was a directed act? And if so, we will likely see, a claim of responsibility from ISIS-K or from Al-Qaeda here very soon.
Rob, a lot to build on here. You've worked with the Afghan groups who worked with and for the CIA before. Reflect on those experiences and what that might mean to try to understand what has been said so far.
Yeah, we worked with all different kind of Afghan units. When I was embedded with the special ops, especially the tier ones, sometimes you would go out and you would meet them, a unit that actually wasn't a vetted unit, and you would do a compound raid next to them. And because you didn't know, you weren't exactly sure, so you always kept an eye out for them. But then there were the ones that were, vetted, like the CIA units that we used to work with. And they would load up weapons and grenades and just be right next to you. And there was no question about it. The CIA had one of the deepest vetting processes out there. And there's obvious reasons why. So it's one of those things that, like, again, Chris and Dave said, this is the ones that were coming over. These were probably the most vetted, as opposed to some of the other ones in the haphazard way that they pulled out. And Afghan people were brought over by vet units. Veteran groups were so proactive bringing these folks over because they fought alongside. I've known Afghans that have lost limbs in operations I was on and killed, and family members. So it's one of those things that it's really tough to look at, because I know how much harder now it is going to be for Afghans to come over here. But as Chris said, we do probably need to that came in this way. But this just wasn't one of them. So again, the FBI has to start with a blank sheet and then start painting the picture from the facts that they find out in the investigation. What radicalized this guy? Was he a long-term plant? It could be, but more likely something happened between the time he came over and his drive here, because to drive across country and do this, there's a lot behind it.
Rob, stay with us, of course, on this topic, and putting on your FBI supervisor hat here. This is a holiday. Unfortunately, we do see spikes of violence during these times. Unfortunately, as I was just saying. What might you be looking for if you're with the FBI right now in terms of copycats of what might be more violence against the National Guard that are now serving in various parts of the country?
We see this, I think, with all kinds of shootings, political shootings, school shootings. And it's not, I don't want to say copycat, because if you're not thinking of doing something and you see this and say, wait, I want to do this, it's more people that were thinking of doing something and they see an event and they like the results. They like the press that this person's getting. They like the fear that it's driving. And then they start decide to act on it. I don't think you weren't thinking about this and then see it and want to do it. But now all the people that were thinking about something see this, they like the results, either it's the press or it's the fear that are putting out there. And then they start to really take actionable things to do something violent. So I think you have to watch out for it. I think the National Guard's members that are out there in the communities really have to look out, because they're in uniform. They're very much, visible to the people. They're not, and someone coming up with a gun is not someone that you're looking for all the time. So they're very vigilant, and they have to be careful. Everyone across the country that's serving right now.
Ariel, back to you. President Trump, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they're saying more troops are coming to D.C., about 500. What could we expect? What are they thinking about doing this weekend?
So there's still more details that need to be ironed out with the timeline as to when they're going to push to have those troops here. We know that this idea of having more troops here in D.C., at least 500 of them, is to make the area, quote unquote, safe and secure. But we've reached out to the White House. We still haven't gotten a timeline on that. And as of now, I could even say, looking around at this location, the scene of the crime, I have not seen one National Guardsman here today. There's been much less of a police presence from yesterday, when this was a real ongoing investigation right behind me. So I expect that we're going to be waiting to hear more details from the White House to get an idea of how that's going to look, especially following.
He's trying to politicize yet another scandal. But as I've talked about, and as many of you have probably noted yourselves independently, whenever he does this, it always boomerangs on him, because it turns out that he was at fault, or that he's done the same thing but worse at a different point in time. So when he's tried to politicize any legal scandal, it's like, man, Donald, you're the one who's literally a convicted felon, right? You know what I mean? And could have been convicted more if not for the timing of the election. And here again, Donald tried to politicize the attack on him, when it turns out the person that attacked him was a registered Republican. And again, here, he's tried to politicize this moment around this shooter who did something objectively awful and should be condemned. And I condemn him, and I know you do as well, right? But Donald Trump tried to make this about immigrants and he tried to make this about the left, and he tried to make this about Democrats, when it turns out, again, that this person was intertwined with the right-wing security state. Left, like, I'm not talking about Democrats, but the left-wingers that he attacks, the Mamdanis, the AOCs, the Bernies, they're not in charge of the FBI or CIA. Historically, the FBI and the CIA has attacked the American left and the international left. And this guy was apparently CIA-linked. And beyond all that, Trump gave him asylum under Trump's administration. And you might say, well, you know, look, Donald Trump doesn't review every single asylum case. And so is it fair to say that Donald Trump gave him asylum? Well, I would counter with, if Biden or Harris or whoever was president right now, and this man got asylum in April under President Kamala Harris, and then he did what he did, I guarantee you the Republican Party would say Harris gave this man asylum. So, Donald, if it's good enough to use as an attack, I'm going to hit you back with it. You're the one that politicized this tragedy. You're the one that put the National Guard there even though it was unlawful. You are ultimately, next to the shooter themselves, the most responsible for this tragedy.